The 15-minute mystery. What if the biggest clue in JayDaYoungan's killing isn't who attacked him, but how they knew exactly where to find him, years after the Louisiana rapper's death? That question still hangs over his family. JayDaYoungan's mother, Letitia Jefferson, has publicly said she believes what happened may have been a setup, and the detail driving her suspicion is disturbingly simple. According to her account, her son had only been at the Bogalusa home for roughly 15 minutes before the attack unfolded. 15 minutes. That is an incredibly narrow window for anyone to learn. Jay was there, know the exact location, organize an attack, and arrive at the property. To his mother, the timing has never made sense. She has repeatedly questioned how anyone could have known where her son would be at that precise moment. On July 27, 2022, JayDaYoungan was outside with his father, Kenyatta Scott Sr. When armed attackers arrived, what followed happened fast. Jay and his father attempted to get away as the situation erupted around them. His father fought back and was wounded, but survived. Jay was critically injured and later died at only 24 years old. From that moment, one family tragedy became an enduring mystery. Jay's father later suggested jealousy over his son's success may have played a role. Authorities considered multiple possible motives, including retaliatory or gang-related violence. But Jay's mother kept returning to the timing. If her son had been there for only a short period, how did the attackers know? That question does not prove there was an insider. It does not prove his father, a friend, or anyone else close to Jay was involved. No responsible account should turn unanswered questions into accusations. But the absence of a proven answer is exactly what makes those 15 minutes so difficult for his family to forget. And there is another reason this story refuses to disappear. JayDaYoungan had already survived serious danger before that evening. He had gone from a teenager making music in a small Louisiana city to an artist with millions of listeners and major commercial records. Fame gave him opportunities to go almost anywhere. Yet he remained connected to Bogalusa, the same city that gave Jay his identity, his stories, and the pain behind his music would ultimately become the setting for the final chapter of his life. So before we examine the attack, we need to understand the young man who came before it, because JayDaYoungan wasn't born famous, wealthy, or protected by the music industry. He came from a place most Americans could not point to on a map. And somehow he made the entire rap world pay attention. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And comment 1 if you believe that 15-minute window deserves closer attention. Or 2 if you think there could be another explanation. Subscribe to the channel, because we're going deeper into the documented story while keeping rumors separate from established facts. The city that made JayDaYoungan, before millions of streams, platinum records, and national attention. There was Bogalusa, Louisiana, a small city roughly 60 miles north of New Orleans that became inseparable from JayDaYoungan's identity. Born Javorius Tyke Scott on July 15, 1998, Jay grew up in a place far removed from the major centers of the music business. Bogalusa had once been known as a paper mill town, but the version Jay experienced was a community facing limited economic opportunity and serious social pressures. For many young people, the traditional routes towards stability could feel painfully narrow. Jay found another route: music. As a teenager, he began turning what he saw around him into records. Instead of trying to imitate Atlanta, Memphis, or another established rap scene, his music sounded rooted in his own environment. It was raw, emotional, melodic, and deeply personal. Influences such as Boosie Badazz, Gucci Mane, and Chief Keef could be heard in the larger tradition he came from. But Jay gradually developed an identity listeners recognized as his own. By 2016, he was releasing music seriously. There was no guarantee anybody outside Louisiana would care. He did not come from a city where record executives were constantly searching for the next star. He had to make people look toward Bogalusa. That became one of the defining elements of his rise. Jay released music relentlessly, allowing individual songs and projects to build an audience piece by piece. His listeners were not simply hearing fictional street stories. They connected with the vulnerability, ambition, pressure, and frustration inside the records. Then, something changed. The kid from a city of roughly 10,000 people began reaching listeners far beyond Washington Parish. The isolation that might have been considered a disadvantage became part of his appeal. Jay sounded specific because his world was specific. But his connection to Bogalusa eventually created a painful contradiction. Success meant he had options that had never existed when he was younger. He could travel. He could work elsewhere. He could build a life far away from the pressures surrounding his hometown. Still, he kept coming back. Maybe that was loyalty. Maybe it was family. Maybe Bogalusa simply remained home no matter how successful he became. Whatever the reason, Jay never completely separated his new life from the place that created the old one. And soon, that teenager releasing music from an overlooked Louisiana city was about to make a record that changed everything. 23 Island changed everything. JayDaYoungan did not become successful because one industry executive suddenly discovered him. By the time the larger music business recognized what was happening, he had already spent years building momentum himself. That distinction matters. His rise came through consistency, songs, mixtapes, videos, and a growing fan base that responded to the emotion in his music. Instead of waiting for permission, Jay used the independent pathways available to a new generation of rappers and kept releasing material until ignoring him became increasingly difficult. Then came 23 Island. Released during his breakout period, the record became JayDaYoungan's signature song and eventually received double platinum certification from the RIAA. For an artist emerging from Bogalusa, that represented something enormous. A voice born in a tiny Louisiana city was now reaching millions. And 23 Island was not an isolated moment. His commercial mixtape Misunderstood reached No. 43 on the Billboard 200. His debut studio album Baby 2-3 later reached No. 6 projects, including Endless Pain and 23 is Back, continued expanding a catalog that increasingly carried Jay beyond the boundaries of Louisiana. He eventually signed with Cinematic Music Group and Atlantic Records, gaining access to larger distribution and promotional machinery. But the central ingredient remained the same. Listeners believed they were hearing Jay. The success created an extraordinary contrast. Professionally, Jay was escaping the limitations associated with where he started. He had records charting nationally, major label infrastructure behind him, money coming in, and an audience that extended far beyond Bogalusa. Personally, however, the separation was far less complete. The world documented in his music had not disappeared simply because the streaming numbers increased. People, relationships, conflicts, and pressures from before fame could still exist after fame. That is where JayDaYoungan's success story becomes more complicated. The qualities that made listeners believe him were connected to the life he actually knew. Bogalusa was not merely a location mentioned in songs, it was part of his identity. But fame changes the stakes surrounding everything. Money, loyalty, envy, relationships, and old disagreements can suddenly carry different weight when one person becomes successful. Jay had achieved what thousands of young rappers dream about. The question was whether professional success could protect him from everything that came with the life he had already lived. The next few years suggested the answer was far from simple. Success came with new pressure. By 2020 and 2021, JayDaYoungan was living between two realities. In one, he was a nationally recognized recording artist whose music was charting and collecting certifications. In the other, his name continued appearing in legal cases and investigations connected to the environment surrounding him. The distinction between allegations and proven facts matters here. Following a fatal 2020 shooting at a trail ride in Tangipahoa Parish, Jay was arrested in September 2021 on charges, including accessory to second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. Authorities allege that he assisted a suspect after the killing. Jay posted bond and was released. An arrest or charge, however, is not itself proof of guilt. Only weeks later, another problem arrived. In October 2021, Jay was arrested during a traffic stop in Washington Parish and faced additional charges involving drugs, weapons, obstruction, and other alleged offenses. Again, these events became part of his public legal history, while his music career continued moving forward. Federal documents described an even broader environment around Bogalusa. Authorities alleged connections between Jay and a group they referred to as the 23 Gang, which investigators associated with drug and firearms activity. Those descriptions represented law enforcement allegations, not a license to treat every person mentioned in those documents as guilty. But for understanding Jay's final years, the surrounding pressure cannot simply be ignored. His music career was expanding, while law enforcement attention around people and groups in his hometown was intensifying. That meant fame had not placed Jay into some completely separate universe. His professional and personal worlds were still overlapping. And that overlap produced one of the central tensions of his story. The authenticity fans loved came from experiences Jay did not invent. He was documenting a world he understood intimately. But maintaining relationships with that world could also mean remaining close to risks that commercial success alone could not erase. Then the danger stopped being something visible only through court documents. It became physical. Within months, Jay would reportedly survive 2 separate shootings in Georgia. Suddenly, the question was no longer whether pressure surrounded him. The question was how many warnings one person could survive before the next incident became the one he could not walk away from. The warnings he survived. The months before July 2022 looked different when viewed with the knowledge of what eventually happened. In November 2021, only hours after being released on bond, JayDaYoungan was shot while inside a vehicle in Georgia. He survived. For most people, surviving one shooting would completely change the direction of their lives. But Jay was living inside circumstances where danger appeared capable of following him beyond Louisiana. Then, only months later, it happened again. In February 2022, Jay reportedly survived another shooting in Georgia. 2 incidents in the same state within a matter of months. And twice, he walked away alive. At the time, survival could make those moments feel like close calls rather than warnings of what was coming. Looking backward, however, they create an unsettling pattern. Jay had money, recognition, and mobility. Yet physical distance from Bogalusa had not automatically created safety. Still, he kept moving. The music remained active. His name remained recognizable. His hometown remained part of his life. Nothing about his public trajectory suggested that his story was approaching its final months. That is what makes July 27 feel so abrupt. Jay had already beaten the odds professionally. A rapper from a small Louisiana city had created a double platinum record and entered the Billboard charts. Then he had beaten another kind of odds by surviving serious violence more than once. But surviving yesterday never guarantees tomorrow. By the summer of 2022, law enforcement activity around Bogalusa was also intensifying. Federal investigators were examining alleged gang, firearm, and drug activity involving multiple individuals in the area. Jay's friend and fellow rapper FG Famous was arrested on federal gun charges that July. None of that proves those investigations caused Jay's death. It does not identify his attackers, establish their motive, or explain who may have known his movements. Those are separate questions. But it shows how much pressure surrounded his world as July approached. And then came Wednesday, July 27. Jay was back in Bogalusa, at a family home, alongside his father. According to his mother's later account, he had not been there long. Around 5:50 that evening, the normal rhythm of the day shattered. This time, there would be no story about Jay surviving another close call. This time, Bogalusa would become the place where the music stopped being a warning and the mystery began. July 27. Louisiana, Wednesday evening. July 27. Louisiana, JayDaYoungan and his father, Kenyatta Scott Sr., were outside a home in Bogalusa when an armed attack unfolded. According to the account presented in the original reporting, a dark-colored vehicle approached the property, and multiple attackers emerged as Jay and his father attempted to move towards safety. Additional attackers were reportedly approaching from another direction. If that account is accurate, this was not random chaos. The attackers appeared prepared. Kenyatta was armed and returned fire while attempting to protect himself and his son. Both father and son were wounded. Kenyatta survived his injuries. Jay's condition was far more serious. Emergency responders rushed him for medical treatment. But doctors could not save him. At only 24 years old, the rapper who had carried Bogalusa's name onto national charts was gone. The numbers and details can make the event sound almost clinical when written on a page. A date, a location, multiple attackers, 2 victims, 1 survivor. But inside the house and inside the family, this was something entirely different. A mother had lost her son. A father had survived an attack in which his child did not. A young child had lost his father. And a community that had watched Jay become its most recognizable musical figure suddenly had to process the reality that he had been killed at home. The hours afterward brought even more instability. Additional shootings were reported around Bogalusa that night, and authorities indicated they believed some of the violence may have been retaliatory. Louisiana State Police were asked to assist the local investigation as officials attempted to understand what had happened. But one fact immediately stood above everything else. Whoever targeted Jay had found him. That detail became increasingly important when his mother later described how little time she believed he had been at the property before the attack. If the window really was approximately 15 minutes, the attacker's timing raised an obvious question. Was Jay followed? Was his location somehow known beforehand? Did someone see him arrive? Or was there another explanation investigators had never made public? Those questions would become even more painful after Jay's mother revealed what happened during her final moments with her son. Because before investigators could provide answers, she heard words from Jay that she would carry for the rest of her life. A mother's final goodbye. Nearly 3 years after JayDaYoungan's death, and his mother publicly returned to the moment no parent wants to remember. During an Instagram Live in 2025, Letitia Jefferson described seeing her son after the attack. Through her grief, she recalled Jay communicating his love for her, while apparently understanding how serious his condition had become. She also described receiving a final kiss from her son. For fans, JayDaYoungan was a voice coming through headphones. For Letitia, this was her child. That difference changes the emotional center of the entire story. Platinum plaques, Billboard rankings, streams, court cases, and rumors become secondary when a mother is left replaying the last minutes she spent with her son. But grief was not the only thing Letitia expressed publicly. She had questions. Most importantly, she questioned the timing. According to her account, Jay had only been at the home for approximately 15 minutes when the attackers arrived. To her, that narrow window made the attack feel planned, and she publicly said she believed her son may have been set up. That belief is significant because it comes from Jay's mother, but it remains her belief, not proof of who arranged the attack. There is no established public evidence in the source material proving that Jay's father, another relative, or any particular person close to him, supplied his location. Turning suspicion into an accusation would go beyond what the known information supports. Still, the timing creates legitimate questions. If Jay's arrival was unexpected, how did the attackers find him so quickly? If they already knew his destination, how did they learn it? Could he have been watched or followed? Could somebody outside the immediate family have known his plans? Each possibility changes the story, but none should be presented as fact without evidence. Letitia also publicly claimed that authorities searched the home afterward and removed approximately $90. 000, she said belonged to Jay, adding another source of frustration to an already traumatic situation. For her, the tragedy, therefore, did not end on July 27. It became a waiting game, waiting for names, waiting for arrests, waiting for an explanation of those 15 minutes. And while she kept asking questions, Jay's father offered a different theory about what may have motivated the people who came for his son. Setup, jealousy, or retaliation. 3 explanations hover over the story, and none should be confused with a proven conclusion. JayDaYoungan's mother publicly expressed her belief that the attack may have involved a setup. His father, Kenyatta Scott Sr., suggested jealousy could have been behind his son's killing. Authorities, meanwhile, reportedly considered possibilities that included gang-related or retaliatory violence. Those theories overlap in some places and conflict in others. Kenyatta told TMZ after the killing that he believed people may have envied Jay because he had achieved something few people from Bogalusa ever reach. Jay had money, fame, successful records, and a national platform. According to his father, Jay did not have an obvious personal conflict with a known enemy that explained the attack. But jealousy alone does not explain the precision. The attackers still had to locate Jay. That takes the story back to his mother's central question. How did they apparently know where he was during such a narrow period? A setup is one possible interpretation of that timing. But setup can imply many different scenarios. It does not automatically mean a relative or friend betrayed him. Someone could theoretically have observed his movements, followed him, learned information indirectly, or obtained his location in some other way. Then there is the broader environment. Investigators were examining federal documents described alleged gang activity involving groups and individuals around Bogalusa, while local authorities were dealing with violence that appeared connected to ongoing disputes. That context gives investigators potential motives to examine. But context is not evidence that any particular dispute caused Jay's killing. This distinction is crucial. Internet theories become dangerous when possible turns into definitely, especially when real people are accused without evidence. The responsible question is not, which family member did it? The responsible question is, what evidence explains how the attackers found Jay and why they targeted him? Years after his death, the public story still does not provide a definitive answer, and that may be the most disturbing part. Multiple attackers reportedly participated. Jay's father survived and witnessed the attack. The incident happened in a residential area in daylight or early evening, yet the mystery remained. To understand why, we have to look beyond the theories and toward the enormous difficulty of turning what people may know privately into evidence prosecutors can actually use. The answers that never came. A high-profile rapper, multiple attackers, a surviving witness, a residential location, a case receiving statewide attention. On paper, it sounds like the kind of investigation that should produce answers quickly, but the source material describes JayDaYoungan's killing as remaining unresolved years later, without publicly announced arrests tied to his death. Why can a case with so much attention become so difficult? One possible explanation lies in the difference between community knowledge and courtroom evidence. People may hear rumors. Someone may believe they know who was responsible. Investigators may even develop theories about motive or affiliation. But prosecutors cannot build a murder case from neighborhood speculation. They need evidence strong enough to survive scrutiny in court. Witness cooperation can become another obstacle. In communities where speaking to law enforcement may create fear of retaliation or serious social consequences, a person who knows something may decide that silence feels safer. Jay's death also occurred against a complicated investigative backdrop. Federal authorities were examining alleged gang, gun, and drug activity around Bogalusa, while local investigators were trying to solve a specific killing. When investigations overlap, information useful to one case can intersect with another, and the public may see only a fraction of what authorities actually know. None of that proves investigators know who killed Jay. It simply explains why an absence of public arrest does not necessarily mean nothing has been investigated. For his family, however, that distinction offers little comfort. His mother has continued speaking publicly. His grandfather said after the killing that no stone should be left unturned. His father survived the attack and has offered his own view of what happened. Meanwhile, Jay's music keeps moving without him. 23 Island remains part of his legacy. New listeners can discover his catalog without ever having experienced his rise in real time. His son continues growing older in a world where his father's voice remains available instantly, while the man behind that voice is absent. That may be the hardest contradiction in JayDaYoungan's story. The internet can preserve an artist almost forever. A song can replay, a video can restart. A new fan can discover Jay today as if the story were beginning again. His family does not get that reset. For them, July 27, 2022 never becomes just another date. And before this story ends, there is one final question worth confronting. What can JayDaYoungan's rise, loyalty, success, and death teach the next young artist trying to escape the same cycle without abandoning the people and place that made them? The legacy, the questions, And the lesson. JayDaYoungan's story did not end when the music stopped recording. In many ways, that is where the hardest part of the story began. He accomplished something extraordinary before turning 25. A young artist from Bogalusa, Louisiana, turned his own experiences into music that traveled far beyond his hometown. 23 Island became a defining record. His projects reached the Billboard 200, and his voice gave a small southern city a place on the national rap map. Whatever controversies surrounded his life, those achievements remain part of his legacy. But success did not create immunity from the environment around him. That may be the most important lesson here. For young artists coming from difficult circumstances, loyalty can become complicated after fame arrives. Staying connected to home can represent love, authenticity, family, and gratitude. But success also changes visibility. More people know where you are. Money changes relationships. Old tensions can take on new meaning. And sometimes protecting the future you worked for requires creating boundaries that your younger self never needed. That is not about abandoning your neighborhood or forgetting the people who supported you. It is about understanding that survival is not betrayal. Jay had already survived dangerous situations before July 27. 2022. Those moments now feel like reminders of something bigger. Getting another opportunity means nothing if the circumstances producing the danger remain unchanged. And retaliation cannot repair what violence destroys. Another attack cannot return somebody's son. Another grieving family cannot heal the first one. When violence becomes a cycle, every act that looks like revenge today can become somebody else's reason for revenge tomorrow. Eventually, children inherit conflicts they never created. Jay's son was only a small child when his father died. As he grows older, he will be able to hear Jay's voice through songs, watch his videos, and understand how many people connected with his father's music. But recordings cannot replace memories that were never given time to happen. That human cost is bigger than streams, blackness, headlines, or internet theories. And the unanswered questions should remain exactly that, questions, until evidence establishes otherwise. Jay's mother has expressed her suspicions. His father has offered his perspective. Authorities have examined possible motives. None of those things gives the public permission to accuse an individual without proof. JayDaYoungan's legacy deserves something better than turning tragedy into another cycle of unsupported accusations. Remember the music, study the warning sign, protect the people you love, and understand that making it out means more than becoming successful. It means staying alive long enough to build something beyond yourself. If JayDaYoungan's story taught you something, hit like, share this video, and subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headlines. And leave one final number in the comments. 1. If you believe his legacy should be remembered primarily through the music and the lessons it leaves behind. Or 2. If you believe the unanswered questions surrounding his death must remain the biggest focus until his family gets clarity. The music is still playing, his family is still carrying his memory, and until verified answers emerge, the responsible thing is not to manufacture a conclusion, but to remember the life, examine the lessons, and hope that the next generation chooses a different ending.